His name was Sergeant Mason Hart, a decorated Marine, loyal to his unit and fiercely protective of those he loved, especially his K-9 partner, Ranger. Known for his steady hand in combat and his quiet sense of humor back on base, Mason wasn't just a soldier, he was the kind of man others trusted with their lives. He followed orders, but he also followed his conscience. And in 2005, during what should have been a routine training exercise near Camp Pendleton, Mason Hart vanished without a trace. 3 years later, the dog he left behind would uncover the truth that no one else could. The morning of July 14, 2005, began like any other along the dusty perimeter of Camp Pendleton. Dry heat already rising off the hills, the scent of sagebrush and sweat lingering in the early air. Sergeant Mason Hart moved with quiet precision through the pre-check ritual, his gear spread neatly across the table in the staging area. Compass, map, field radio, hydration pack, M9 sidearm, extra batteries, everything accounted for, down to the black electrical tape he used to keep his boots sealed tight against rattlesnake country. He barely spoke to anyone that morning. Not unusual, Mason had always been the quiet one in Echo Platoon, dependable, focused, the kind of Marine who didn't waste breath or energy. But something about his silence felt different that day. Not cold, just final. He glanced down at Ranger, the German shepherd sitting alert by his feet. The dog tilted his head, sensing something. They always said military working dogs knew more than we gave them credit for. When a building was wired to blow, when a man was about to run, when another was about to break, or when someone wasn't planning to come back. "Stay," Mason said softly, crouching to meet Ranger's eyes. "You're sitting this one out." That was the first red flag. Mason never left Ranger behind. They were a team, bonded through 2 tours overseas, dozens of patrols, and a dozen more IED finds. The pair had survived ambushes, night raids, and grief together. Everyone on base knew that if you saw Mason, you saw Ranger, but not today. He handed Ranger's leash to Lance Corporal Sutton, who looked at him confused. "You good, Sergeant?" Mason offered a tight nod. "Just a quick nav run, back by noon." He signed the exercise log at SOF 32 hours, marking his assigned solo route, a familiar 6-mile loop along the outer training perimeter. The land out there was rough, a blend of dry ravines, scraggly hills, and hard-to-navigate switchbacks. Mason had done it dozens of times. It was basic terrain work, nothing complicated. The sun crept higher as Mason walked away from the main compound and disappeared into the thick brush line. A fellow Marine later recalled seeing him cross a distant ridge around Oslo 830. After that, nothing. By 1400 hours, when Mason failed to check in at the designated rendezvous point, radio attempts began. No response. At 1430, a helicopter was dispatched. Ground teams were scrambled. The search grid expanded rapidly as command grew concerned. Ranger, still back at the kennels, paced frantically. He barked at every vehicle door that opened, lunged at the gate twice, and eventually lay pressed against the chain-link fence, nose toward the hills. Like he knew. By sunset, Echo Platoon was on full alert. Sergeant Mason Hart, veteran of 2 combat tours, had vanished during a daylight navigation drill less than 10 miles from his own bunk. There was no signal, no trail, no blood, no gear. The terrain showed no signs of struggle, only the absence of a man who had been there just hours before. That night, Base Command filed the first of many reports. Sergeant Mason Hart. Missing in action, and somewhere behind a locked gate, Ranger began to howl. The morning after Mason Hart vanished, Camp Pendleton buzzed with tension. The early light caught the dust in the air as search teams fanned out across the scrubland, combing every ridge, ravine, and thicket within the designated grid. Helicopters hovered overhead, their rotors stirring the dry heat, while K-9 units sniffed tirelessly along potential trails. Leading the ground search was Staff Sergeant Eli Dorn, Mason's closest friend and the unofficial second-in-command of Echo Platoon. His jaw was set tight as he moved through the underbrush, eyes scanning for any sign, a boot print, a broken branch, a discarded piece of gear. Each minute, without a clue, tightened the knot in his stomach. Eli and Mason had been through the worst together, deployments in Afghanistan where bullets sang overhead and nights where neither man slept, haunted by what they'd seen. Mason was more than a teammate, he was family. And now he was gone. Rumors began to swirl around the base almost immediately. Whispers in the mess hall and barracks ranged from the hopeful to the sinister. Was Mason AWOL? Had he staged his disappearance to escape something? Or worse, had he been kidnapped? The possibility of suicide echoed quietly but persistently, though it didn't fit the Marine they knew. Mason was disciplined, loyal, a soldier to the bone. Still, no one could explain why he'd left Ranger behind for the first time ever. That alone fueled speculation. Had Mason been in trouble? Had something happened on the ground during that routine exercise? Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Base Command was quietly pulling files. Echo Platoon's records, mission reports, and personnel files were scrutinized in search of anything unusual. Mason's recent activity was dissected, emails, phone records, even his bank transactions. No obvious red flags appeared, but Command knew better than to take things at face value. Eli was brought in for questioning multiple times over the next few days. He answered calmly but refused to speculate. He insisted Mason wouldn't disappear without reason and that something darker might be at play. His face betrayed the pain of uncertainty and the burden of responsibility. As days turned into weeks, frustration and fear settled over Echo Platoon. The men and women who had fought alongside Mason grappled with disbelief. Each of them faced their own demons, memories of missions, lost comrades, and secrets too dangerous to share. One by one, some started to crack under the pressure. Rumors emerged about fractured relationships within the platoon, old arguments, unspoken tensions. A particularly sharp dispute between Mason and Corporal Shane Rivas in the days before the disappearance was quietly hushed up, but it left a lingering shadow. Meanwhile, Ranger remained a fixture on base, pacing restlessly near Mason's empty bunk. The dog refused to eat, growled at strangers, and howled at night. To those who knew him, it was clear Ranger was mourning, but some whispered the dog was trying to tell them something. With no leads, no evidence, and no body, the case was gradually labeled unresolved. Mason's disappearance was a stain on the platoon's reputation and morale. Command urged silence, warning the Marines to keep their heads down. Media interest flickered briefly but soon died, leaving a void where answers should have been. For Eli Dorn, every unanswered question was a knife twisting deeper. He vowed not to let Mason be forgotten. Something wasn't right. Someone was hiding the truth. And until he found it, the search would never be over. For Ranger, the days after Mason's disappearance were the darkest he'd ever known. The German shepherd, a fierce and loyal partner, paced endlessly in Mason's quarters, whining softly as if calling out for his friend. The familiar scent of Mason still lingered on the worn dog bed, on the leather leash, on the dog tags that Mason always wore close. But the man was gone, vanished like a ghost into the harsh scrublands of Camp Pendleton, leaving only silence behind. Ranger refused to eat for days, his bright eyes dull and haunted. The kennel staff watched with heavy hearts, knowing the bond between handler and dog was unlike any other. The military had trained Ranger to be a weapon, to detect explosives, to protect, to obey without question, but no training prepared him for this. After several weeks with no sign of Mason, the command made the difficult decision. Ranger would be removed from active duty and officially retired. The policy was strict. Military working dogs whose handlers were missing or killed were typically adopted out to civilian families who could provide a stable, peaceful home. It was the kindest option, though for Ranger it felt like another abandonment. The Stratton family was chosen to adopt Ranger. The Strattons were no strangers to military life. Mike Stratton was a retired Navy SEAL, and his wife Karen was an Army nurse. Their teenage son Luke was fascinated by the dog's history and quick intelligence. They welcomed Ranger into their home with open arms, hoping to give him the calm he desperately needed. At first, Ranger was wary. The change from military base to suburban neighborhood was jarring. No drills, no commands shouted in clipped tones, no smell of gunpowder or sweat. Instead, there was grass under his paws, a soft bed, and quiet afternoons with Luke throwing sticks in the backyard. Yet, beneath the calm exterior, Ranger carried an unshakable tension, a restless spirit that never truly settled. Meanwhile, back on base, the investigation into Mason's disappearance limped along without closure. Months turned to years. Officially, the case was unresolved, a category for missing personnel with no evidence of death or foul play. The media attention faded, replaced by newer headlines and missions. Echo Platoon was reassigned, and life on base moved forward. But the shadow of Mason Hart lingered. For Ranger, the passage of time only deepened the mystery. Despite his new life, he refused to forget. He would sit by the window for hours, staring toward the distant hills where Mason was last seen. When the Strattons took him hiking near the edge of Camp Pendleton's training grounds, Ranger's behavior changed. He would suddenly freeze, ears pricked, nose twitching in the air, as if sensing something invisible to everyone else. The family grew protective of him, sensing that Ranger was holding onto a secret only he knew. Luke often found himself talking quietly to Ranger, as if the dog could hear the questions in his voice. "Where is he, boy? What are you trying to tell us?" At night, Ranger sometimes howled softly, a mournful sound that echoed through the quiet house. It was a call for a friend long lost, a plea for answers that no one had given. Though Mason was gone, Ranger's loyalty endured. He was no longer just a military dog. He was a keeper of truths, a guardian of memories, and the last link to a mystery that refused to fade. 6 months before Mason Hart vanished near Camp Pendleton, Echo Platoon was deep in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, conducting a mission codenamed Valley Sweep. The operation was officially described as a routine search and clear of a suspected insurgent supply route, but the tension among the Marines told a different story. There was something unsaid, a weight behind the orders that kept the men on edge. Mason had sensed it from the moment they crossed the border into the valley. The air was thick with dust and uncertainty, but beneath it lay something colder, a feeling of eyes watching from hidden corners, shadows moving just out of sight. His job was simple: sweep the area, secure it, report any activity. But Mason's instincts told him this wasn't routine. The platoon advanced cautiously through rocky ravines and sparse villages, the sharp crack of gunfire never far off, but always out of reach. Local villagers avoided their gaze, and the occasional stray dog vanished as the Marines passed. Mason moved with Ranger close at his side, ears alert for the faintest scent of danger. It was on the third day, after hours of dry marching and silent watching, that Mason spotted something odd. A narrow dirt path veering away from the main route, partially concealed by scrub brush. Unlike the rest of the area, this path showed signs of recent activity: tire tracks, fresh footprints, and discarded debris. Mason felt a pang of unease. He followed the trail cautiously, Ranger sniffing at his heels, until it ended at the mouth of a hidden bunker carved into the side of a hill, unmarked, unregistered, and starkly out of place. The entrance was obscured by old tarps and camouflaged netting, but Mason's sharp eyes caught the glint of something metallic inside. He motioned for silence, pulling out his compact digital camera. The rules were clear: no unauthorized photos. But Mason couldn't shake the feeling that this bunker was something the chain of command wasn't prepared to acknowledge. Something bigger than the insurgent activity they'd been sent to disrupt. Steeling himself, he snapped a few quick shots of the inside. Rows of metal crates, stamped with foreign markings, electronic equipment buzzing faintly, and beyond that, faint outlines of what looked like holding cells or cages. The cold realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a supply bunker, it was a secret holding area, a site that suggested off-the-record detainment, maybe even illegal operations. Mason tucked the camera away, heart pounding. He said nothing of it to anyone on the mission, not even to Eli Dorn, his closest friend. The weight of knowledge pressed on him, an invisible burden. The rest of the platoon moved on, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant of the secret they'd just stumbled upon. Back at base, Mason tried to report the find through proper channels. His emails and verbal reports were met with vague reassurances and requests to stay focused on your mission. The silence was deafening. Mason suspected the information had been buried intentionally. Within weeks, cracks began to form in the platoon. Several members showed signs of psychological strain. One Marine was discharged for behavior deemed unstable. 2 others suffered breakdowns. Shane Rivas and Mason argued heatedly in private, words unspoken to others, but charged with fear and accusation. The mission ended quietly, officially declared a success. But Mason knew the truth was far darker. He felt watched, shadowed. His gut told him that what he'd seen at that bunker was a secret someone would kill to keep. The photos remained locked in his pack, his only proof. And then, months later, Mason was gone. 3 years had passed since Sergeant Mason Hart disappeared without a trace. The dust had settled over Camp Pendleton, and life marched on with the quiet urgency only a military base could muster. Echo Platoon had moved forward, the missing Marine's name whispered in hallways and mess halls, but mostly relegated to cold files and forgotten reports. To the Stratton family, however, Mason's memory lived on through Ranger, the dog who never quite let go. It was the summer of 2008 when Mike Stratton decided to take Ranger and his family on a camping trip to a remote area near the eastern perimeter of Camp Pendleton. The Strattons were accustomed to the outdoors. Years of military service had ingrained a respect for the rugged terrain, and they hoped a weekend away would offer Ranger some peace and give their teenage son, Luke, a chance to escape the buzz of everyday life. The camp was nestled at the edge of a wide ravine where scrub oak gave way to dry riverbeds and rocky slopes. Ranger took to the area immediately, sniffing every bush and tree with a focus that seemed almost purposeful. At first, the family enjoyed the tranquility of the quiet canyon, the warm glow of campfires under starry skies, and the simple pleasure of being together. But soon, Luke noticed something unusual. Ranger was acting differently. Instead of the typical curiosity dogs showed in new places, Ranger's behavior was obsessive. He would drag Luke toward one particular spot at the edge of the ravine and begin digging with frantic energy, his paws tearing into the dry earth as if desperate to uncover something hidden beneath. "Hey, Ranger, calm down," Luke said, pulling gently at the dog's collar. But Ranger would have none of it. He pawed harder, throwing dirt aside and growling low in his throat. It was almost as if he recognized the spot from long ago. Mike and Karen Stratton exchanged worried glances. "Maybe he smells an animal den," Mike suggested, trying to reassure the family, but the tension in Ranger's eyes told a different story. After nearly an hour of digging, Luke's fingers brushed against something hard beneath the soil. He cleared the dirt away and found a small, bleached bone. It was fragile, but unmistakably human. His heart pounded as he called out to his parents, "Mom, Dad, come here quick!" The family gathered around the small excavation site, their faces pale in the flickering firelight. Karen covered her mouth in shock. Mike's jaw tightened, and Ranger sat back on his haunches, ears perked, eyes locked on the unearthed bone. Luke's mind raced. Could it be? The stories of the missing Marine, the rumors swirling around Camp Pendleton, were they finally coming to light? Was Ranger trying to lead them to Mason? The night air felt heavier as Mike reached for his phone to contact base authorities. Ranger stayed still, as if waiting for something to unfold, his loyalty unwavering even after all this time. The Strattons knew this moment would change everything. What began as a quiet camping trip had turned into the reopening of a mystery that no one wanted to face. And Ranger, the dog who had never stopped searching, had just found the first real clue. The call came just before dawn. The voice on the other end was steady but tinged with urgency. Authorities had examined the site where Ranger had dug up the bone, and the results were in. The remains were Sergeant Mason Hart's. For the Stratton family, the news shattered years of uneasy hope. Ranger's discovery wasn't just a clue, it was confirmation of a truth no one wanted to face. Mason had been gone all along, buried in the unforgiving terrain near Camp Pendleton. But the questions only multiplied. At the makeshift crime scene, investigators found more than bones. Among the dirt and dry brush lay a rusted dog tag, unmistakably military issue. The tag, though corroded by time and exposure, still bore Mason's name and serial number, a silent testament to the man who had disappeared. Nearby, a shattered field radio lay half buried in the dirt, its cracked casing revealing the intricate circuitry inside. It was the kind of radio Echo Platoon had used during training exercises, but this one showed signs of tampering, as if someone had tried to disable it. But the most troubling discovery was yet to come. A second set of dog tags was uncovered just a few feet away. These belonged to Corporal Shane Rivas, Mason's former platoon mate, whose name had surfaced in hushed conversations and thinly veiled rumors in the days following Mason's disappearance. Rivas had died 2 years earlier in what was officially ruled a rollover accident during a training exercise. But the proximity of his dog tags to Mason's remains raised unsettling questions. Were the two deaths connected? Was Rivas involved in what happened to Mason? And if so, why? The military police reopened the investigation, quietly at first, reluctant to draw public attention. Mason's case had long been considered a closed file, a missing soldier presumed dead with no evidence of foul play. But now, the evidence suggested something darker, a possible crime, or even a cover-up. News leaked to local media outlets, reigniting public interest and speculation. Headlines asked, "What really happened to Sergeant Mason Hart?" and "New evidence suggests a conspiracy at Camp Pendleton." Within Echo Platoon, the atmosphere shifted. Veterans who had been silent for years began speaking off the record. Some spoke of tension within the unit, unexplained absences, and heated arguments in the months before Mason's disappearance. Others hinted at secret missions and unauthorized activities that might have gone wrong. Staff Sergeant Eli Dorn, Mason's closest friend, was contacted by NCIS. His response was measured but heavy with emotion. He recounted a strained conversation he'd had with Mason shortly before the disappearance, a conversation about things Mason had seen during a classified mission overseas. Mason had feared for his life. Meanwhile, forensic analysts examined the bullet casing found near the grave. Ballistics tests revealed the casing did not match Mason's assigned weapon. It was from a different, more specialized firearm, one typically issued to a private military contractor, not a standard-issue Marine. This discovery added a new layer of complexity. Was a third party involved? Was Mason's death the result of an off-the-books operation gone wrong? As authorities dug deeper, they found that Rivas had maintained contact with several private contractors based in Southern California. Digital records and text messages hinted at meetings and possible covert exchanges in the months leading up to his death. For the Strattons, the unfolding investigation was a whirlwind of emotions. They had adopted Ranger hoping to give him peace, but the dog had unknowingly led them to a truth that threatened to unravel lives and reputations. Ranger, oblivious to the human turmoil around him, lay quietly at Luke's feet, loyal as ever, as the search for answers grew more urgent and more dangerous. The news that Mason Hart's remains had been found shook the military community and reignited interest from law enforcement agencies, but it was the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, that took the lead on the reopened case. Quietly, deliberately, they began peeling back layers that had long been left untouched. The Stratton family received a visit from NCIS agents just days after the discovery. The atmosphere was tense but professional. They were warned in no uncertain terms to remain silent. Any leaks could jeopardize the investigation, they were told. The Strattons understood the gravity of the situation, but the order weighed heavily on them, especially on Luke, whose bond with Ranger had drawn them into the center of a case far beyond their expectations. Ranger, meanwhile, had become more than just a beloved pet. He was now considered a potential key to unlocking the mystery. NCIS handlers requested detailed records of his behavior, routines, and the locations he frequented since joining the Stratton family. His actions at the campsite where he unearthed Mason's remains were scrutinized as a clue pointing toward the truth. Back at the base, the medical examiner's report sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Mason's body showed unmistakable signs that contradicted previous assumptions. The cause of death was a close-range gunshot wound to the back of the head, consistent with an execution-style killing. There was no evidence of a struggle or accidental injury, no marks indicating a fall or suicide attempt. For the first time, it was clear Mason Hart had been murdered. The discovery stunned Mason's former platoon mates. The official narrative of a missing soldier lost to the wilderness was shattered. Instead, the truth was far more sinister, buried under years of silence and perhaps intentional obfuscation. Eli Dorn, Mason's closest friend, was called back to Camp Pendleton for a series of interviews. His face bore the weight of 3 years of unanswered questions. When pressed, he revealed how Mason had grown increasingly anxious in the months before his disappearance, hinting at fears of being targeted for what he had witnessed during the Valley Sweep mission in Afghanistan. NCIS investigators began re-examining Echo Platoon's activities, digging into classified mission logs and internal communications. They found numerous irregularities, reports that had been redacted, key personnel who had suddenly left the service, and files that had mysteriously gone missing. Questions also arose about the timing and nature of Corporal Shane Rivas's death 2 years prior. His fatal rollover accident was now under renewed scrutiny, especially given his close proximity in death to Mason and his known contacts with private military contractors operating in Southern California. Amid the intense investigation, the Strattons lived in a new reality of uncertainty and surveillance. NCIS agents set up periodic check-ins and even installed discreet security measures around their home. The peaceful life they had hoped to offer Ranger was now overshadowed by shadows of danger and suspicion. Ranger himself seemed to understand more than the family realized. He was more alert, more protective, and would often stare intently toward the west, toward the training grounds where Mason had last been seen alive. The investigation was far from over. Every answer uncovered seemed to lead to more questions. What had Mason discovered that made him a target? Who had orchestrated the cover-up? And how deep did the conspiracy run within the military and beyond? As the Strattons and investigators braced for what was to come, one thing was clear. Mason Hart's disappearance was not a simple tragedy of war or wilderness. It was a deliberate act of violence, concealed for years by those sworn to protect him. And Ranger, the faithful dog who refused to forget, had become the beacon of hope in the darkness, the living reminder that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of clawing back to the surface. The quiet hum of the Stratton household was broken one rainy afternoon when Luke found himself alone in the living room, scrolling through the family's old video archives. His fingers paused over a collection of camping trips and hikes recorded on their old digital camcorder, footage they'd taken over the past few years, mostly forgotten and gathering digital dust. Curious, Luke decided to revisit the camping trips they had taken since Ranger joined their family. He hoped to understand the dog's strange behavior, the moments when Ranger seemed hyper-focused, almost frantic, near that ravine by Camp Pendleton's outskirts. As Luke fast-forwarded through the grainy footage, his heart skipped when he saw it. Ranger digging. But this wasn't just any digging. It was the same site Ranger had furiously clawed at just weeks ago, the spot that led to Mason Hart's remains. The first clip, dated nearly a year before Mason's bones were found, showed Ranger stopping abruptly during a family hike. His ears perked, his nose twitched, and then he began digging with a determined urgency. Luke remembered that day vaguely. They had been too distracted to pay much attention, assuming Ranger had just detected a small animal burrow. Luke rewound and played the clip again, eyes narrowing. Ranger had dug for almost 10 minutes, clawing at the dry earth with sharp, precise motions, as if trying to uncover something specific beneath the surface. But no one had noticed then. No one had thought to investigate the area further. A second clip appeared from several months later during another outing to the same ravine. The pattern repeated. Ranger stopped dead in his tracks, sniffed the air, then dug furiously at the same spot. This time, Luke's parents were present, but even they dismissed the behavior as typical dog instincts. Luke sat back, a sinking feeling growing in his chest. Ranger hadn't just been a pet reacting randomly to nature. He'd been trying to tell them something all along, a secret hidden beneath the earth that no human had yet uncovered. The realization sent chills down Luke's spine. Ranger's relentless digging was no coincidence. It was a silent plea, a message from the dog who had shared a bond with Mason Hart deeper than anyone could understand. With new determination, Luke called his parents together to show them the footage. The Strattons watched in stunned silence as the videos played out, the repeated attempts Ranger had made to reveal the secret long before Mason's remains were discovered. For the family, the videos were a haunting confirmation. Ranger wasn't just reacting to the present. He was connected to the past, to Mason, to the mystery that had consumed their lives since adopting the dog. The footage also reignited questions. Why hadn't they noticed sooner? Could the authorities have found Mason's remains months earlier if Ranger's signals had been recognized? Was there a chance the truth had been delayed, even buried, because no one understood what the dog was trying to say? Luke began to pore over every detail, not just the videos, but Ranger's behavior since they'd adopted him, the dog's obsessive vigilance, his howling at night, his refusal to settle. Each piece fit into a larger puzzle about loyalty, loss, and the search for justice. The family also realized that Ranger's trail was more than physical. It was emotional. The dog carried the weight of Mason's fate, a silent witness to a crime hidden beneath the surface. As the Strattons prepared to share the footage with NCIS investigators, Luke whispered softly to Ranger, "You've been trying to tell us all this time, haven't you, boy? We're listening now." In the end, it was Ranger's trail, the footprints of a dog who never gave up, that became the most vital clue of all. The once close-knit Echo platoon had long since fractured under the weight of secrets, loss, and unspoken horrors. As NCIS investigators reopened Mason Hart's case, they turned their focus toward his old squad mates, the men who had stood beside him through fire and hardship. One by one, the surviving members of Echo Platoon were summoned for interviews. The process was grueling, dredging up memories many had tried desperately to bury. The interviews were held in sterile rooms, the harsh fluorescent lights reflecting the strain in the eyes of those who sat across the table from the agents. What quickly became clear was the toll The mission known as Valley Sweep had taken on the men, both physically and psychologically. Of the 8 Marines in Mason's squad, 3 had died by suicide since returning from Afghanistan. The reasons behind their decisions were complicated, but grief, guilt, and trauma weighed heavily. Their deaths had been hushed up or chalked up to combat stress, but now the investigations suggested something darker lingered beneath the surface. One other Marine, Corporal James Jace Warner, had vanished entirely. His whereabouts were unknown, last reported leaving the country under mysterious circumstances. Attempts to trace him only led to dead ends and cryptic online posts hinting at fear and betrayal. Those still alive appeared shaken, their faces pale as they recounted fragments of the past. They referenced Valley Sweep with a mixture of fear and resentment, but refused to provide details. When pressed, their answers were vague, defensive, or quickly diverted. The phrase, "we don't talk about that," was repeated, a chilling barrier guarding the truth. Echo Platoon had been shattered not just by combat, but by something else, something far more insidious, a shared trauma that bonded and broke them simultaneously. They had seen or done things that haunted their waking hours and plagued their dreams. During one particularly intense interview, Staff Sergeant Eli Dorn, Mason's closest friend, broke down. His voice cracked as he admitted the squad had been ordered to keep quiet about what they found in that hidden bunker, a secret operation that blurred the line between military duty and moral compromise. "The things we saw, it wasn't what we signed up for," Eli said, his eyes haunted. "We were told to leave it behind, but it's still there, in the back of our minds. It's like a ghost that won't let us rest." The platoon member's reluctance was not just fear of punishment, but fear of betrayal from within. They suspected that certain people, higher up the chain of command or linked to covert agencies, were responsible for suppressing the truth. To speak out could mean professional ruin, or worse. Behind the silence, investigators sensed a deep fracture, trust destroyed by secrecy, camaraderie eroded by guilt. The soldiers were haunted by the knowledge that Mason had been targeted for trying to expose the truth, that he had paid the ultimate price for his courage. Some of the interviews revealed subtle clues, a look exchanged, a hesitation before an answer, a mention of names never fully spoken aloud. There were hints of cover-ups, of evidence disappearing, and of threats made to keep lips sealed. The ghosts of Echo Platoon were not just memories, they were living men and women, weighed down by shadows that refused to fade. Each of them carried a piece of the puzzle, pieces they were too afraid or too loyal to share. As investigators pressed further, the tension grew. The deeper they dug, the more resistance they encountered. It was clear that the truth about Mason's disappearance and the mission in Afghanistan was being deliberately concealed. The question was not whether the darkness existed, it was how deep it ran, and who was willing to protect it at all costs. Staff Sergeant Eli Dorn had long since left the Marine Corps behind, retreating to a quiet, sun-baked life in the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. The desert heat was a stark contrast to the damp fog of Camp Pendleton, but the shadows of his past followed him like a specter. For years he had avoided contact with investigators, reporters, and anyone connected to the case of Mason Hart's disappearance. Silence had become his shield, a fragile barrier protecting him from memories too painful to face. The day Eli received a plain, unmarked package from Luke Stratton, however, was the day that silence began to crack. Inside the box lay Ranger's old collar, worn, weathered, and marked with Mason's name and service tags. Alongside it was a simple note from Luke. "This dog never forgot, neither should we." Eli stared at the collar, his hands trembling. Memories flooded back like a tidal wave, the bond between Mason and Ranger, the days before the disappearance, and Mason's whispered fears that had never left Eli's mind. That night, Eli sat alone in his modest home, the collar heavy in his lap. The weight of years spent carrying secrets finally became unbearable. For the first time since Mason vanished, Eli picked up the phone and called NCIS. His voice was rough, cracked by years of silence. "I need to talk," he said simply. When Eli finally met with the investigators, the man they saw was not the stoic Marine leader they remembered. The years of repression had worn on him, leaving a haunted figure trembling with guilt and sorrow. "I should have done more," Eli said, voice breaking. "Mason trusted me. He told me things that scared him to his core." He took a deep breath, steadying himself before continuing. Mason was never just a soldier following orders. He was a man with a conscience. When we were in Afghanistan during that mission, Valley Sweep, he found something, a secret bunker, something off the books. He took photos, but he knew if that got out it would ruin lives. He told me he feared for his life, that someone was watching us. Eli's eyes filled with tears. He begged me to keep quiet, said he was going to try to expose it, but if anything happened to him, I had to make sure someone knew the truth. The investigators pressed gently but firmly. "Did Mason say who was behind it? Did he name anyone?" Eli shook his head. "No. He was afraid. Said it was too big. People higher up than us, people who could make things disappear. He said if we weren't careful, we'd be next." Eli's voice faltered, and he swallowed hard. "After Mason disappeared, I was lost. I didn't know who to trust. I thought staying silent would protect me, protect all of us. But it never did." He paused, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "I blamed myself every day for not pushing harder, for not following up." The investigators sensed the burden he carried was crushing. "But now," Eli said, his voice steadying, "I want to help. Mason's gone, but I owe him that much." As the meeting ended, Eli felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Opening up had been like ripping open a wound, but it was the first step toward healing, and toward finally uncovering the truth about Mason's fate. Outside the room, Eli glanced at the collar once more, a silent promise passing between him and the memory of his friend. No more silence. No more hiding. For the first time in years, Eli Dorn was ready to face the ghosts that had haunted him and to stand with those who still sought justice for Mason Hart. The sterile room at the NCIS headquarters felt colder than the Arizona desert where Eli Dorn had spent the past years in isolation. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, Dorn took a deep breath and began to unravel the story he had held inside for so long. "It wasn't just any mission," Eli said, voice low and steady. "Valley Sweep wasn't about insurgents or supply routes. We stumbled onto something that wasn't meant for us to find. A covert CIA black site. The investigators leaned in. This was the breakthrough they'd been waiting for." Eli continued, "We were told to clear the valley, secure it. But when Mason found that bunker, the one with no markings and cages inside, he realized this wasn't standard military business. There were prisoners there, held off the books. Not enemy combatants captured in the field, but people nobody was supposed to know existed." He paused, eyes shadowed with memories. "Mason tried to report it through the proper channels, but the response was silence. Vague orders to move on, to forget what we'd seen. That was the first red flag." Mason's unease grew with every passing day. He confided in Eli that he believed the black site was part of a secret CIA operation designed to interrogate detainees away from public scrutiny and legal oversight. "But," Eli said grimly, "we weren't supposed to know, and worse, we weren't supposed to talk." The weight of that unspoken threat hung heavily in the room. Someone high up on base, or maybe even beyond the military chain, was determined to keep it quiet. Mason believed that's why they wanted him silenced. Eli's voice tightened with anger. He was convinced that what happened to him was no accident, that he was targeted because he refused to stay silent. When Mason disappeared during the training exercise at Camp Pendleton, Eli said he knew immediately it was more than just a lost soldier. The absence of Ranger, Mason's dog and closest companion, was another puzzle piece. Ranger was trained to stay with Mason, no matter what, leaving him behind. That was a sign something was very wrong. Eli's eyes grew distant. We tried to follow up, but the investigation was stonewalled. Reports vanished. Witnesses were discouraged from talking. And then Shane Rivas died under suspicious circumstances, officially an accident, but no one really believed that. As the pieces came together, the story revealed a chilling picture of a cover-up involving military personnel, intelligence agencies, and contractors operating in the shadows. Eli admitted the burden of silence had weighed heavily on him and his platoon. The deaths by suicide, the fractured relationships, and the fear among the men were symptoms of the deep-rooted conspiracy that had cost Mason his life. But now, with Mason's remains found and the Strattons' discovery bringing new attention, the truth was finally breaking through. "We need to expose this," Eli said quietly. "For Mason, for those who can't speak anymore, and for everyone who was caught in the middle." The NCIS agents nodded, already making plans to dig deeper into classified records and push for accountability. As Eli left the interview room, he felt a flicker of hope for the first time in years. The off-book operation that had haunted his nightmares was coming to light, and with it, the chance to finally bring justice to the man who had vanished into silence. The quiet life the Stratton family had tried to build was shattered overnight. Ever since Ranger's discovery led to Mason Hart's remains and the reopened investigation, the world around them had shifted. What once felt like a sanctuary had become a battleground, invisible threats lurking just beyond the periphery. It began with the unsettling feeling of being watched. Karen Stratton noticed it first. Subtle, almost imperceptible signs. The way headlights flickered past their home late at night, the distant sound of a vehicle engine idling too long on their street, shadows that seemed to linger just beyond their windows. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia, the product of worry and stress. But then the break-in happened. One night, when the family was asleep, an intruder slipped silently into the house. Their movements were careful, practiced, not a desperate burglary, but a targeted search. They rifled through Luke's room, pulling open drawers and scattering papers, seeking something specific. They took no valuables, no electronics, only a battered folder full of notes and printouts that Luke had painstakingly compiled about Mason's case and Ranger's behavior. When the Strattons discovered the intrusion the next morning, the sense of violation hit hard. This wasn't random. It was a warning. Luke felt a cold mix of fear and determination. "They're trying to stop us," he said grimly. "Whatever we've found, it threatens someone." Ranger, usually calm and loyal, became more protective than ever. His eyes scanned the horizon with fierce vigilance, and he snarled at every unexpected sound. When an unmarked black SUV appeared parked a few blocks away, lingering suspiciously during the day and again at night, Ranger's behavior escalated. He growled low, hackles raised, pacing aggressively near the windows. Mike Stratton called NCIS immediately. Within hours, agents arrived at their home, apologetic but firm. They informed the family they were now under protective surveillance. Cameras were discreetly installed, and plainclothes officers began monitoring the area around their house. The Strattons were given instructions on safety protocols, avoid isolated areas, report any unusual activity, and maintain communication with their assigned agents. The family's lives had become a balancing act between normalcy and vigilance. At night, Ranger slept near Luke's door, alert to every creak and rustle. Luke, who had always been fiercely independent, now found himself leaning on his parents and the NCIS agents for support. Yet his resolve never wavered. The threats only steeled his determination to uncover the truth behind Mason's disappearance. Karen and Mike shared quiet moments of worry. They'd adopted Ranger, hoping to give him peace, not knowing their loyalty to Mason would put their family in danger. Now, the stakes were higher than ever. The unmarked SUV remained a constant shadow, disappearing only briefly before reappearing in different locations near the Stratton home. The agents suspected the vehicle was surveillance, perhaps part of the same covert network trying to bury the secrets of the black site and Mason's death. NCIS intensified their investigation, using the Strattons as a critical link to push forward. Every move the family made was tracked, both by protectors and potential threats. Amid the tension, Ranger's behavior provided the family with a strange comfort. The dog seemed to sense dangers they couldn't see, his instincts sharper than any surveillance system. His loyalty and vigilance reminded them why Mason had trusted him above all else. As the Strattons faced this new reality, living under watch, caught in a dangerous web, one thing was clear: the truth Mason had died protecting was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And Ranger would be by their side every step of the way. The investigation into Mason Hart's death was gaining momentum, but every new piece of evidence seemed to deepen the mystery rather than clarify it. NCIS forensic teams had spent weeks analyzing the bullet casing found near Mason's burial site, and their findings were striking. The bullet was traced back to a weapon issued to Corporal Shane Rivas, Mason's former platoon mate, who had died in a suspicious rollover accident 2 years earlier, officially ruled a tragic mishap, but long whispered about as something far more sinister. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. If the bullet came from Rivas's weapon, what was his connection to Mason's execution-style killing? Had Rivas been directly involved, or was there a more complex web of loyalties and betrayals at play? Digital forensics soon uncovered a crucial lead. Examination of Rivas's encrypted communications revealed a series of contacts with a private military contractor operating out of San Diego. This contractor was not just any mercenary group. They were linked to shadowy military intelligence operations, rumored to handle off-the-books missions and covert surveillance for government agencies. Text messages and email exchanges uncovered by NCIS hinted at clandestine meetings, financial transactions, and discussions about operations that skirted legal boundaries. Rivas appeared to be an active participant, or at least deeply entwined in this network. One message stood out: a cryptic reference to the Valley Sweep fallout and a warning to keep the operation quiet at all costs. The implications were chilling. Investigators theorized that Rivas, far from being an innocent casualty, may have been part of the covert efforts to suppress knowledge about the CIA black site Mason had discovered. His death, originally dismissed as an accident, was now being reconsidered as potentially staged to silence him or protect higher-ups. Further digging revealed that the contractor had ties to several high-ranking military officials who had both motive and means to orchestrate a cover-up. The private contractor's employees operated in the shadows, with little oversight, capable of enforcing silence by force. This new layer of conspiracy expanded the scope of the investigation beyond Echo Platoon and Camp Pendleton, hinting at a sprawling network of secrecy that blurred the lines between military authority, intelligence agencies, and private military companies. Meanwhile, the Strattons learned of the developments through their NCIS contacts. The web of danger around them grew thicker, but so did their resolve. The bullet linked to Rivas proved that the past was not dead. It was actively reaching out, threatening those who dared to seek the truth. Luke, ever determined, began researching the private contractor, piecing together public records, contracts, and witness accounts. The more he uncovered, the more he realized the depth of the hidden player's influence, a shadowy force with stakes far beyond a missing Marine or a single platoon secret. Ranger, too, seemed to sense the escalation. His alertness sharpened. He guarded the family with unwavering loyalty, as if aware that the stakes had never been higher. For NCIS and the Strattons, the discovery of this hidden player marked a turning point. The investigation was no longer just about uncovering Mason's fate. It was about exposing a clandestine operation with tentacles reaching into the heart of the military-industrial complex. As the pieces fell into place, one chilling truth became clear. Some players in this deadly game were willing to kill to keep their secrets buried, and they still held the power to threaten anyone who came too close. The search for answers had taken Luke Stratton and Eli Dorn on a twisting, harrowing journey through shadowed secrets and silent threats. Yet nothing had prepared them for what they found that overcast afternoon in a long-forgotten storage unit tucked away in a dusty corner of San Diego. The unit had belonged to Mason Hart, a detail unearthed by Luke after combing through months of forgotten paperwork and rental records. It was a small, nondescript space filled with old boxes, military gear, and weathered belongings. Layers of dust coated every surface, but what drew Luke and Eli deeper was the feeling that something important was waiting for them. As they sifted through the clutter, Eli's fingers brushed against a taped envelope, yellowed with age but remarkably preserved. The faded handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Mason's. With cautious hands, Luke peeled back the tape and slid the envelope open. Inside was a photograph, old and creased at the edges. The image was hauntingly familiar. Mason and Ranger stood at the entrance to the hidden bunker deep in the valley, the one that had set off the chain of events leading to Mason's disappearance. Mason's face was serious, eyes locked on the camera with a look that betrayed both determination and unease. Ranger sat faithfully by his side, alert and ready. But it was the message written in Mason's sharp, hurried handwriting on the back of the photo that stole the breath from their lungs. "If anything happens to me, follow the dog." The weight of those words hung heavily between Luke and Eli. It was a final, desperate plea, Mason's last attempt to leave a breadcrumb trail for someone who cared enough to find the truth. Ranger had not just been a companion. He had been Mason's guide, a living link to the secrets buried in that valley. Eli swallowed hard, memories flooding back. "He must have known he was in danger," Eli said quietly, "that someone wanted to silence him. But he also knew Ranger would never forget." Luke nodded, the pieces clicking into place. Ranger's relentless digging, his refusal to leave the Strattons, it was all part of Mason's plan. The dog had been Mason's eyes and ears when no one else could listen. The discovery reignited their resolve. This wasn't just a case of a missing Marine anymore. It was a mission to honor a friend's courage, to expose a dangerous conspiracy, and to bring justice to those who had been silenced. Luke and Eli decided to share the photo and message with NCIS immediately. The photograph became a key piece of evidence, a symbol of loyalty and hope amidst the darkness of betrayal and cover-up. As they left the storage unit, Ranger walked close by Luke's side, his steady presence a reminder of the bond that had defied time and danger. The dog's eyes gleamed with quiet assurance, as if understanding that the final chapter was still unwritten. For Mason, who had vanished in the shadows, this message was a beacon, a last powerful call to follow the trail he had blazed. And for those left behind, it was a promise. No matter how deep the darkness, the truth would find its way back to the light. In the end, it was Ranger who never gave up, the dog who had stood faithfully by Mason Hart's side through the darkest moments, the one living witness who refused to be silenced. For years, Ranger's quiet vigilance had gone unnoticed, a restless spirit trapped in a canine's body, searching for answers no human dared seek. When Mason vanished, Ranger's world shattered. Removed from service and placed with the Strattons, Ranger carried the invisible weight of his missing master, his every instinct drawing him back to a secret buried beneath the earth. It was Ranger's relentless digging, his inexplicable fixation on a remote ravine near Camp Pendleton, that ultimately cracked open a case that had long been considered cold. When Ranger unearthed Mason's remains, along with critical evidence that contradicted the official narrative, the fragile walls of silence began to crumble. The investigation that followed unveiled a web of deception, betrayal, and covert operations that reached far beyond the bounds of Echo Platoon. Ranger's discovery forced military investigators, former platoon members, and even a grieving family to confront uncomfortable truths. Mason's death was no accident, no simple tragedy. It was an execution, a punishment for seeing what he was never meant to see, for trying to expose a shadowy black site operated in secret, and for trusting his closest friend to carry on the fight. Throughout it all, Ranger remained the steadfast symbol of loyalty and resilience. The dog who had been left behind but never truly abandoned, whose actions spoke louder than any testimony, and whose presence reminded everyone of the bond that transcended words. The Strattons, initially ordinary civilians, swept up in a military mystery, became protectors of that bond. Their love and care gave Ranger the strength to keep searching, to keep fighting, even when the danger grew near. They became allies in a quest for justice that challenged powerful forces intent on burying the truth. Staff Sergeant Eli Dorn, Mason's closest friend and fellow Marine, found renewed purpose in that journey. Together with Luke Stratton and the NCIS investigators, they pieced together the puzzle Mason had left behind: the hidden bunker, the covert CIA black site, and the sinister cover-up that had cost lives and fractured friendships. As the final pieces of the investigation came to light, arrests were made. The cover-up was exposed to the world, sending ripples through military and intelligence communities. Those who had tried to silence Mason Hart were held accountable, their secrets laid bare for all to see. For the families of those lost, Mason, Shane Rivas, and others silenced by fear, the truth brought a bittersweet closure. The pain of loss remained, but so did the hope that justice could still prevail. And through it all, Ranger's unwavering loyalty was the heart of the story, a testament to the unbreakable bond between a Marine and his dog. In quiet moments, Luke often watched Ranger resting near Mason's memorial plaque at Camp Pendleton. The dog's eyes, filled with both sorrow and peace, seemed to say what words could not. I never forgot. I never stopped. Loyalty never fades. It endures beyond time, beyond fear, beyond death. Mason Hart's story, once lost to silence, was finally heard because Ranger never gave up.